Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nik Nanos.
Nik, we've had a stunning Conservative by-election victory at Toronto St. Paul's. A lot to take in there. But first, what are the latest ballot tracking numbers?
Latest ballot tracking numbers from Nanos. Conservatives, if you look at the trend line, Conservatives at 41%, Liberals at 27%, so 14 points back. And then you have the NDP bloc at 8%, Green Party at 4%. So, you know, the thing is we still have the Conservatives in the driver's seat. It's kind of like, oh, by the time we hit this summer, it'll be like a year, you know, that last time it was last year in August, the Conservatives started to pull away from the Liberals. It'll be interesting to see whether through the summer, whether they maintain that double-digit advantage.
I mean, the Conservatives have been remarkably consistent, but are you seeing a lot of differences, change, variation in the non-conservative parties, let's say, the NDP and Liberals specifically?
Yeah, that's been where all the movement has been in the Nanos tracking, at least. You know, like what we've seen is there's movement between the Liberals, the New Democrats, and the Greens, and to a lesser extent the Bloc in the province of Quebec, and that the movement between all the other parties, other than the Conservatives, has basically explained in the Nanos tracking whether the margin is 14, 16, 18, or 20 percentage points. But the key takeaway, Michael, is what you said at the very beginning. You know, the Conservative numbers have consistently been in the 40s, which if there were an election held today, and there's not an election held today, but if there were an election held today and the Conservatives were in the 40s in terms of popular support, that would speak to a victory. Kind of like Brian Mulroney, right? In the 1980s, the first Mulroney sweep. That's the territory that the Conservatives are in right now. It'll be interesting to see whether they can keep up that big advantage.
Yeah, I'm curious, Nik, about how soft the support is for, both for the NDP and the Liberals. And with the Liberal stronghold riding former stronghold riding of Toronto St. Paul's, it was a Liberal riding for 3 decades and the Conservatives cracked through. I think the question was, would a lot of NDP supporters maybe at the ballot box change their minds, vote for the Liberals? We did not see that happen. Listen to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
These are not easy times, and it's clear that I and my entire Liberal team have much more work to do to deliver tangible, real progress that Canadians across the country can see and feel. We'll never stop working and fighting to make sure that people have what they need to get through these tough times. My focus is on your success, and that's where it's going to stay.
Nik, what do you make of that?
Was that kind of like Winston? Was he channeling Winston Churchill? We will never surrender. The Liberals will never surrender. It's like we will never stop working. Yeah, difficult times. If you're a Liberal, 100% difficult times. If you're Conservative, not so much. The reality is that this was a surprise. Anecdotally, and the stuff from the ground suggested that the Conservatives were going to be competitive. No one knew how competitive that they would be. One thing, Michael, that really stood out for me was the advance polls, which came in at the end of the night. There was a significant number of individuals that voted in the advance polls, and the advance polls is actually what put the Conservatives over the top. What does this mean? This means that the Conservative ground game in Toronto St. Paul's was way better, way better than the Liberal ground game, and that the Conservatives were able to identify and deliver a lot of their vote in advance, and this is what put them over the top. So this by-election was a failure of the local Liberal campaign team to deliver its vote, or to kind of mobilize the progressive vote to try to keep the Liberals and to hold the riding against the Conservatives. And it was also, I would hazard to say, a referendum on the government and on Justin Trudeau. And, for a lot of individuals in Toronto St. Paul's that might have traditionally voted Liberal over the last 30 years, they could send a message, whether it was about the capital gains tax, whether it was about the Liberal policy in the Middle East, whatever, pick whatever you want. They could either stay home or vote for the Conservatives in order to send a message to Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals. And boy, that's a big message that they sent. Another little tidbit, this riding, Barbara McDougall, former progressive conservative cabinet minister under Brian Mulroney. So this is kind of like not necessarily a conservative riding, not necessarily a liberal riding. It's kind of like a bit of the old school progressive conservative style. So 30 years in the red column, no more.
Nik, presumably, there's a lot of hand-wringing on the Liberal side about, or question marks around Justin Trudeau's future as leader in the party now. But that said, we may not have a federal election until October 2025, an eternity in politics. Do you think that this is a bit premature? And also, what is Trudeau's summer homework to improve things?
Well, first of all, we can't project a by-election onto the general election, except everyone should take note that the Conservatives did much better and the Liberals much worse than in the last federal election. It speaks to where the momentum is. But you know what, Michael? This is kind of like Justin Trudeau is now in the political shark tank. Like when someone gets dropped into the shark tank, the sharks first start by kind of with their nose bumping into the target, or why don't we just call it supper? And it starts off with them bumping into it, kind of roughing up the meal a little bit, and then someone takes a little bite. And then after the bite, there's a feeding frenzy. I think what Justin Trudeau has to watch out for is that over the next while, that there aren't a few individuals within kind of what I'll say the Liberal family that decide to bump into the target, so to speak, because they're worried about the Liberal political fortunes. However, if I can add a however, Michael, I'm not sure did the Conservatives really want this outcome? And yes, of course they want a seat and they want to win. But I think the Conservatives and Pierre Poiliever want to run against Justin Trudeau. They basically, by winning, created conditions that puts pressure on Trudeau to step down or to be pushed out. And that makes it a whole new, that kind of resets everything. It doesn't mean that the Liberals will automatically win, but it's just a resetting of the political calculus for the Conservatives, because their whole campaign is built about Pierre Poiliever against Justin Trudeau. I think maybe it might have been better for the Conservatives to lose by 1 percentage points, which would have put the fear of whatever into the Liberals, because they would have been very upset. Even, they would have been happy to win, but would have been very upset with a very close, with the Conservatives doing really well. But at the same time, Justin Trudeau being able to say, hey, maybe we only won by 1 or 2 percentage points, but we did win. Like, he can't even say that now, which makes it much more difficult for him. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag.
On that note, what does Conservative leader Pierre Poiliever do this summer with this upset?
I think for the summer he continues. I think probably to focus on the organization, get candidates nominated, do the barbecue circuit, and just kind of try to ride the blue wave that he's been on since last August, and basically not to make any mistakes. The other thing that's quite interesting is that the Conservative campaign, it might suggest what the national strategy is, and the Conservative campaign locally didn't do a lot of media. They just straight focused on getting the vote out and organization. They didn't say a lot, and the focus was on the Liberals, and that paid off, because what it allowed was a focus on the local Liberal candidate and also on Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, and it allowed the Conservatives, not quite by stealth, but why don't we say stealthily, were able to kind of organize and pull off this pretty significant victory.
Nik, I think it's fair to say that the New Democrats haven't been an especially strong presence in Toronto St. Paul's in that riding in the past, but so I don't want to read too much into this on the NDP side. But if your leader Jagmeet Singh and you're hoping to be sort of the the place for soft Liberal supporters to go to, what do you do this summer?
Well, in Toronto St. Paul's, at least, the NDP numbers went down about, I think, 5 or 6 percentage points. It was like in the mid-teens, down to about 10 or 11. There wasn't a big effort from the New Democrats in the riding. They actually do quite well in the riding provincially. For Jagmeet Singh, he's got to decide how long is he going to prop up the Liberals, because the Liberals losing Toronto St. Paul's is a big signal that they're noticeably in trouble. Because if ridings like Toronto St. Paul's vote Conservative, and I've said, like, when I mentioned former Progressive Conservative Cabinet Minister Barbara McDougall, like, when the Conservatives start winning ridings like Toronto St. Paul's and Don Valley West and stuff like that, that's when the Conservatives are usually coming back into power. So for the New Democrats, they've got to decide how long they're going to stick with the Liberals, and when they want to pull the plug on the parliamentary arrangement, because they have to worry about just being connected to the Liberals and people not being enthusiastic about voting NDP.
Nik, ballot tracking is one thing, but how those numbers translate into seat projections is quite another. You've done the work on that, and I'd love to go coast to coast and see where things stand. Can we look at the East Coast, Atlantic Canada first?
Absolutely. So we've crunched the numbers and done projections, Nanos projections based on our statistical model. These we should say that our statistical model currently and these projections are based on the current riding boundaries, and then when we come back in September, we will have everything loaded up with the new boundaries. But check out the Maritimes. You can see Cape Breton in play. You can see kind of either gray or black in Cape Breton. You look at a province like PEI, we have one riding that the Liberals are holding on to, two of the other ridings that are in play. Halifax is also in play, but between the Liberals and the New Democrats. But the long and the short is that the Conservatives will be picking up seats in Atlantic Canada, a number of them in the province of Nova Scotia, maybe even one in PEI, and it'll be if this particular trend holds up, the Liberals will be dealt a setback in the Maritimes and also in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Nik, what about Quebec? I'm curious how the Bloc is doing there, and if we've seen any real erosion of support for the Liberals there as well.
Well, the thing is that in our seat projections for Quebec, we've got some interesting things going on. The Bloc are challenging the Liberals in Gaspésie, so that riding is in play. If you look at Montreal on the South Shore and Longueuil and stuff like that, you can see that there's a BQ threat for the Liberals there, and even when you look at the island of Montreal, there's some ridings like Laurier Saint Mary's, for example, that are toss-ups actually between the Liberals and the New Democrats. So similar narrative in other parts of the country, except in this particular case, the Liberals having ridings at risk either from the New Democrats or the Bloc at this particular point in time.
Next door, in Ontario, I'd love to start with the GTA first and see if what happened in Toronto St. Paul's is a sign of what's to come. What's happening there?
Well, you can see if you look in the little map, the Toronto St. Paul's riding itself is in black, which means it's too close to call. It's within 2%, which is actually what the results of the by-election were, basically a couple percentage points. But, look at the ridings like Eglinton Lawrence and York Centre. In what we're seeing basically in Toronto is the Conservatives being much more competitive in Toronto. So they could pick up ridings like Eglinton Lawrence and York Centre. You look at the two Etobicoke Lakeshore, for example, too close to call. You can see those are kind of shaded out. And ridings like Willowdale looking pretty good for the Conservatives. And, so what we're seeing is the Liberal Fortress Toronto basically under siege. So maybe Toronto St. Paul's is the canary in the coal mine. And, a lot of these ridings like the Don Valleys and Willowdales and, St. Paul's and all those ridings and the Etobicos, when the Conservatives start picking up those ridings, that's usually indicative of a big Conservative win. Those are the ridings that were held when Mulroney was Prime Minister, for example, and had really big wins.
Any surprises for the rest of Ontario?
Well, if you look at the map and the projections, it's pretty blue. There were spots of red, but it's pretty blue. Well, also we didn't do a zoom into Ottawa, but you know, the Conservatives are challenging very strongly in a number of the ridings outside of the immediate downtown area, challenging the Liberals. So the Liberals are gonna be in a dogfight in a number of the ridings in Ottawa that the Liberals currently hold.
Nik, I think I know what you're going to say about the prairies. I think you know, but maybe there's a surprise. What's happening there?
Still blue. How's that? I don't want to get, I don't know how much we can say, you know, the Conservatives have a, you know, their base in terms of seats are the prairie provinces.
Mhm.
They were a lock and have been a lock for the Conservatives, even when they lost the last number of elections, and they continue, you know, they continue to be a lock for the Conservatives right now. So no big, when the Conservatives just think they were way ahead before the August beginning of the new surge that the Conservatives had, that's now lasted almost a year, and coming out of the surge, they're looking even stronger. But you know, they already are doing really well in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba.
Nik, is there any sort of an Anne McGrath in Edmonton, and any hope for the Liberals there?
Not today. Unless you brought back Anne McGrath, that would be the one way to do it. You know, I think, you know, for the Liberals in some of these ridings that they have held in the past, the reality is they're going to need some pretty substantive and strong local candidates, because we have to remember, we talked about the ballot numbers. So think of the Liberal brand, they're 14 points back. Think of Justin Trudeau as preferred prime minister, he's 12 points back. There's no political coattails right now for the Liberals, either for their brand or for their party leader right now. And so what we're saying, at least, is the polling under the current configuration with this leader, Justin Trudeau, and this policy direction does not connect with voters. And I think the only way to overcome that, well, there are a number of ways to overcome that. One of them would be to have a really strong local candidate where you get people to vote for the local candidate. And then for the Liberals to have some sort of change, either in an update on their policy direction or potentially a new leader.
Finally, Nik, British Columbia, always wild over there. Always interesting. What's happening with the latest?
Yeah, and I'd like to say British Columbia is always for pollsters. You know, pollsters have done a great job in terms of mapping out where things are going in British Columbia, but we have to realize that British Columbia has one of the most complex kind of environments, because, you know, the Conservatives are competitive, the Liberals are competitive, the New Democrats are competitive, as are the Green Party of Canada. You know, they're really, truly, you know, multi-party races with vote splits. And British Columbia can be like multiple ridings, like the Lower Mainland compared to the interior. Very different things. But zoom into Vancouver, which is you can see on the right-hand side, the previous election, very red, very Liberal. Look how blue it is right now. And this speaks to the sea change that's happening right now, where in those ridings where, you know, the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP are competitive, those three-way splits are really helping the Conservatives go over the top.
Wow. Nik, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, how Canadians feel about their economic future. Nik, we've seen a slight uptick in inflation recently, and you know, I'm curious how Canadians feel about the cost of living these days.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that when we think of the cost of living, a number of components, like say, for example, you know, whether people have been impacted by inflation. And, you know, what's interesting now is, like, we ask people whether they've delayed purchases and cut back, or whether both of those things have happened, or whether they've not been impacted by inflation. And right now, in the latest Nanos tracking, about 42% of Canadians say that they have not been impacted by the rising cost of living. And, you know, the thing is, you know, that's back in March, I think, of 2022, 48% said that they were not. So half said they weren't. So the fact of the matter is, right now, more than half of Canadians are reporting some sort of negative impact. And if you're younger, that impact of the rising cost of living goes even higher among younger Canadians.
Clearly, if you're the government in power, clearly a difficult time with Canadians feeling this way, and we've obviously seen Conservative leader Pierre Poiliever take advantage of this.
Yeah, 100%. We have to remember also, Michael, that when we look at the bigger picture on how Canadians feel about the future, whether the standard of living for future generations will be higher, lower than the same, check out the trend line on this. Like, it's brutally bad for Canada, at least from a sentiment perspective. 70%, or 7 out of every 10 Canadians, think that the standard of living for their kids and their grandkids, the future generations, will be lower, while only 8% believe that it'll be higher. And that lower number of 70%, or why don't we just call it the pessimistic number, has never been higher in more than 10 years of tracking, and the optimistic number has never been lower on that measure.
Nik, I think I've asked you the same question before, but I always ask it. If the economic indicators change, do you see the sentiment changing as well? And do you think that will turn fortunes around for the popular support of the Liberals?
Well, the thing is that if the economic conditions, or if the economy picks up, and it's never bad for any incumbent government when the economy is better, because they have something to talk about, right? The other thing that's quite interesting, especially when you get into a campaign or an election cycle, is if there's positive economic numbers that come out during the writ period, when all the federal party leaders are on the campaign trail, that's good news for the incumbent, in the same way that if the numbers dive during the election, it can be brutally tough for an incumbent government, because opposition party leaders get to say, aha, look, things are going in the wrong direction. So I think for the Liberals, they're probably hoping that the economy is stable or improves, so that people don't feel as grumpy as they are right now, because the reality is people are worried about housing, people are worried about the rising cost of living, and they're pessimistic about the future. It's hard for incumbent governments to fight those type of numbers.
Nik, this is our last episode before we go on summer break. I just want to thank you. I want to thank our listeners and viewers for following the show. Always much appreciated. I hope you have an enjoyable summer, and to everyone out there as well. As always, Nik, thank you.
Take it easy.
Oh, and we'll be back in the fall. I should add that. So please catch us in September.